So hello, and thanks for joining us again. Many thanks for all the likes and subscriptions we've received. It's really encouraging, and we're glad you kind of liking the content we put out. Today, Mark's going to talk a little bit about trauma responses. And before we do, Mark, obviously you've got many skills and many talents to your name, but what do you do? What's your job? What do you do?
I have a long list, so I say that I'm a counsellor, therapist, supervisor, trainer, and I offer spiritual guidance. A
Fantastic.
lot.
Okay.
In this film for today, I guess I'm kind of drawing on my counselling and psychotherapy understanding to talk about trauma responses.
Wonderful. And that leads us on, doesn't it? So what is a trauma response?
Well, I think that what people don't realise is that they've probably experienced trauma. So, we tend to think, don't we, of trauma as like, if you've been in a war or, I don't know, had a massive car crash or something like that. But the reality is that most of us will have experienced some kind of trauma in our early life. So I use the example when I'm training students on this, that, like if you're 5 and your pet rabbit dies, that's traumatic. Whereas for an adult, it might be like, well, rabbits only live 5 years, whatever they live, and it's not a big deal, and we can get a new rabbit. But for the child, that is a trauma, isn't it? Because that's like devastating. So that could be an incident that was traumatic for that child. So I think we need to realize that it's very likely that we've all experienced trauma to some degree, not necessarily war-like trauma, but we will all have had some kind of traumatic experience in our early years.
Okay. And how might these trauma responses play out? What are they? Have they got names? Have they got?
Yeah, but we've got a very easy to remember but hard to say list. Okay, so the standard, and there's other ones too, but just to simplify it, the main trauma responses are flight, fight, freeze, and fawn.
Okay.
Like I say, easy to remember but hard to say.
Certainly after a drink, I'd imagine.
Yeah,
And we've got the
exactly.
four F's there.
Yeah. So when we as human beings experience trauma, we have to have some way of coping with it, don't we?
Yeah.
And so these trauma responses are ways that we have of coping with really difficult situations in a moment, and they're generally not well thought through. So, if you're experiencing some kind of traumatic incident, you haven't really got time to sit down and think, okay, what's the best course of action here? What would be the most useful, or what is going to be the most helpful? We generally come from almost like an animalistic, primal survival place with this. So we don't have time to sit down and think about it. So often the trauma responses are not well thought through responses to difficult times.
Okay.
So it's worth remembering that, because what we're going to go on to talk about is how these things will then play out later in our life in like our adult relationships. So it's worth realizing that some of the stuff that we will do as adults in our relationships and in our lives won't make any sense. They won't be logical, they won't be rational, they won't be well thought through. So if we go back to understanding that this is a primal survival animalistic thing, not a rational adult thing, so it's useful to remember that.
Is it possible to correct them then? So obviously, we're talking about the four F's and they sound quite extreme. Is it possible to become self-aware and actually get these under control or change them?
It is, thankfully. Otherwise, we're all doomed, aren't we? We're all just stuck with doing this forevermore. So yeah, with support, with someone who, perhaps a trained therapist or someone who understands this, can help you to spot how these are playing out, and then can help you to kind of connect to the origins of them, and then perhaps we can learn to kind of make different choices. Because as an adult, we do have different choices to those that we had in earlier life, don't we?
Absolutely. Could you perhaps give us an example, a real life example of how this might play out, for example?
Yeah. Well, let's think about then just an example that perhaps most people can relate to, the experience of perhaps just being at school and being bullied, somebody being unpleasant, calling you names, that kind of thing. I guess most people might have experienced something like that. So if this person who was being bullied at school were to adopt one of the trauma responses, they might use the flight response. And that's about getting away. Flight, imagine taking flight, running away. So maybe this person would cope with the situation of being bullied by running away, perhaps leaving school, playing truant, not wanting to go back into school, getting mum to write a sick note or something. So anything like this, anything that gets them away, so get away from the threat, get away from the problem. Then the fight one, if we stay with the same example of someone being bullied, then they might decide to roll up their sleeves and get stuck in and punch the bully in the nose or something. So they might fight back. they might kind of think the best way I can cope with this now is to, you know, punch me in the stomach or something. So they want to fight the bully back.
Could that also be sort of verbal as well? You could actually
Yeah.
fight back verbally rather than
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, give them a tongue lashing. That's an old-fashioned phrase, isn't it? But you
Yeah.
might do that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And then freeze. So it might be that you kind of just like imagine in a traumatic moment, you just freeze. So you might just stand there and just listen to what the bully is saying, listen to the names they're calling you, and not be able to respond or fight back or run away. You're just literally frozen, and you just, you know, stand there or whatever and take what's coming.
Okay.
The other one, I guess, and I suppose I'll add it in here. The other bit about freeze is that you might become inactive. So you might not make a decision. You might not want to take any responsibility for anything. So it'd be like, you know, if someone asks you something, you might say, well, what do you think? You might not want to do anything just for fear of getting it wrong or antagonizing the bully or whatever. And the last one is fawn, and that's about keeping people happy. It's a bit of an old stereotypical example, but you know, the person who says like, do my homework for me or you're going to get it, you might end up doing that person's homework for them as well as you can, perhaps better than your own, to keep people happy. Okay. So that just very simple examples of how these things might begin in our early life, and once we've developed these patterns, they stay with us.
That's right. That's right.
Forever, really, unless we become aware of them and work to change them. So we were going to look, weren't we, at how we might play these things out in our adult life. Yeah. Yeah. So if we go through the same list again, then. So if your trauma response that you developed as a child was to flight, to get away, whenever there's anything difficult or unpleasant in adult life, and I want to add in here, it's if there is something real or you perceive it to be real. That's so crucial, because sometimes we will perceive a threat when there isn't one. Agreed. Sometimes there is, but sometimes we perceive it, we imagine it to be one and it isn't. So whether it's real or perceived, what we might do is run away. We might want to get miles away from the person. We might move to the other end of the country. We might kind of run away from a job. We might kind of just anything really where we run away. So of course, you know, that might help when we're 6 and being bullied in the playground, but is it helpful when we're 46 and we're running away from partners and jobs and homes and communities and children? And it's a bit more problematic, isn't it?
Most definitely.
And then the flight when we're in adult, the fight one, so hard to say these things. All right. The fight one is about fighting, isn't it, and self-preservation. So as an adult, you might perceive there's a threat and start fighting before you've even checked out, actually, is there a threat here? Yeah. You might kind of, I don't know, pick a fight with your partner, or pick a fight with colleagues at work or the boss or whatever. You might just kind of find yourself fighting all the time. When actually there's nothing really to fight for, because it's all right, you just threat. The freeze, I think the biggest way I see the freeze thing in clients, you know, adult clients, is not being able to make a decision, being stuck. Yeah, because if you think about it, if you're afraid of doing something that's going to upset or do something that makes it worse, you just won't make any decisions, you won't make any changes. Yeah, people just get stuck, don't they? Most definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
Or they stay far longer in relationships perhaps than they should.
Yeah.
Or a job that doesn't serve them. And so literally frozen. Yeah.
Anything where you're stuck, where you're just not making any changes, not making any decisions, staying with what you know. There's that old saying, isn't it? Better the devil you know.
Yeah.
Anything like that, you could well be playing out a freeze response.
Yeah.
And the last one, the fawn one, so this was about keeping people happy, the person who does the bully's homework for them as best as they can. So, you know, if you've developed a fawn response, then you're probably a people pleaser. So you'll want to keep people happy at any cost. You know, no matter the cost to yourself, you'll be trying to keep people happy.
Yeah.
I guess because you don't upset anyone then, but the reality is you do.
Yeah.
So if you do upset people, you know, I'm thinking of situations where a people pleaser, you know, perhaps in 3 or 4 different situations, how on earth do they do it? Because they have to keep all of those different people happy. And then what if those 3 or 4 people in different situations come together? It becomes impossible for the people, you know, family parties, for example, or work meetings. It becomes so hard for the person playing out the fawn response to people please all those people, because some of the contradictions are going to come to light, aren't they?
Yeah. And it's very much well, you're pleasing so many people. There's not an ounce of self in your life, is there?
No, definitely not. It doesn't matter about you. All that matters is about people pleasing. I've heard people describe themselves as chameleon-like. So
Right.
they'll
Okay.
change their colours to fit into any situation they're in, and then really struggle when those different people come together, like at a family wedding or
Hmm.
an important work meeting, and it becomes really difficult because the chameleon can't do the chameleon thing when you've got several different people all together at once.
Do
So
you think
people
that?
pleasing.
Oh, sorry. Do you think that these served us well, or maybe served people well in childhood if there was stuff going on, sort of being bullied? But we find that as we go into adulthood, these really impede the happiness, what we were achieving, who we were around.
Mm.
Do you think also that people are a little bit aware that maybe their reactions aren't quite right, but they don't know another way, or do you think people are oblivious?
I think people don't know because the thing is when we're playing out I can't do it.
Yeah.
A trauma response, one of the flight, fight, freeze, fawn things. If we're playing that out, we probably don't realize we're doing it because in our world, we just think there's a real threat there. So
Yeah.
I'm justified in giving them a piece of my mind, or there's a real threat there. I need to get away. So the person who's experiencing this probably has no idea that they're playing out a trauma response. So no idea they had trauma, they developed a response, and that they're playing that response out.
How might life be trying to tell them though? I'm aware that we're oblivious, but life might be showing us in many ways that our responses aren't great.
Signs.
Signs, absolutely.
Yeah. So it needs a bit of honesty, doesn't it, really? We've got to kind of have a look and say, okay, so how many times have I run away from a partner? Or how many times have I left a job? Or how many times have I tried to keep people happy at my own expense? How many times do I keep getting stuck in a situation I'm not happy in and don't change it?
Yeah.
These are the kind of these patterns, aren't they? These patterns, these cycles that we tend to kind of just repeat and repeat and
Yeah.
repeat, and then just wonder, why on earth am I always in this situation?
Mhm.
It's nothing to do with being a bad person or a weak person, or there being something wrong with you, or you being cursed, or any of these things that people can think about. It's just a trauma response, a survival strategy you developed early in life that's still playing out and needs changing.
Brilliant, brilliant. I think that's a really good way of explaining that. And I think we'll come back at another time and do a video leading on from this.
May as well, yeah, why not?
But I think it's a great description.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking your time. And as always, we'll say to people, if you like what we're doing here, please like and subscribe. And final word to you, Mark.
Well, I was saying, share it with your friends on your social networks. It's good to get the word out there. We're trying to, bring these complex topics to people in a really kind of easy to understand way, aren't we?
It's time to do it, isn't it? It's time for people to understand and do some healing and feel better.
I think so.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.